Hey, this is Clark again, and I have another one of my Father's Day shirts on today. You can't scare me. I have two daughters, and this is one of the shirts I got here recently, and I thought I'd wear another one for the video today. Just want to talk a little bit from Book of John, and just what type of person are you? And just using this passage, I see about three different kind of people here in this passage in the Book of John, starting in chapter 11. Now, in the book of John, about over 50% of it's that last week of Jesus' life. So literally, right before the Passover, like 6 days before the Passover, and of course Jesus is, killed on the Passover, crucified. So this last week, where the Last Supper takes place, all that takes place, over 50% of the book of John is just in that last week. Now, when you look at the Gospels as a whole, the four Gospels, about 35% of that last week is in the Gospels. So I think the least amount on the last week is the book of Luke, which about 25% of the book of Luke is on the last week. And I may be wrong about this, but I think Mark's about 40%, and then Matthew somewhere in there in between as well. But so John spends a lot of time on this last week. So here he is in this last week. And you can see, and today I don't have the two iPads today like I do sometimes. I'm kind of looking at my old go-to, the actual book that I have, a KJV here that I have some notes in. But here is the death of Lazarus. Now, of course, his sisters, Mary and Martha, and they're having a feast at the house because really, basically, of what happened with Lazarus, that he was raised from the dead. So he's raised from the dead in chapter 11. And then you basically see these people. So about verse 55 says, "And the Jews' Passover was nigh at hand." Now this is the Passover when Jesus is crucified. And it says, "And many went out of the country up to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves." This is typical. This is what Jewish people would do before the Passover. It says, "Then they sought for Jesus, and spake among themselves as they stood in the temple, What think ye, that he will not come to the feast?" So this is the first group of people I see. And I know you could use the three types of people, and you could probably pull out other things, whatever. But in this passage here, I see this curious group of people, the watchers, the people that are just standing back and really won't do anything. They won't even make a decision. And that's these people here. This is the first ones you see. They're looking for Jesus, and they're literally saying amongst themselves, "Where is he? Where is Jesus?" They just want to know where he's at, what he's doing. They're just curious. They just want to see what he's about. Is it true? Should they believe it? I know there's so many thoughts that goes into this, and you see these people again. I'm going to hit the first verses in chapter 12, but you see these people again as it gets down to about verse number 6, I think, or 8, says, "For the poor," and in verse 9, "Much people of the Jews therefore knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might see Lazarus also, who him had raised from the dead." So they hear that Lazarus has been raised, and they just want to see. They're curious. They're wondering if this is true. And literally the next verse says, "But the chief priests consulted that they might put Lazarus also to death." So this is part of that curious group, that group of just watchers. And really, these are a group of people that are, and when it comes to the chief priests, that they're literally not just skeptical, but they want to put Lazarus to death. Now, I almost find that humorous, because here's a man who Jesus just raised from the dead, and they want to kill him. He just died a few days ago, and he's dead for 4 days, and then Jesus comes and raises him, brings him back to life, and now they're like, okay, we got to kill this guy. So I just find that humorous. It's like, what would keep Jesus from just raising him again? Considering what just happened. But because of Lazarus, his testimony, literally his testimony is the simple fact that he's alive. Now, probably he was bragging on Jesus. Probably he had said some things about what happened. He was telling them his life story, and people were hearing it. People were believing. People wanted to follow Jesus because of this. Literally in the book of John, when you get to the end, it says, "And many other things, could be written, that could not be held." But he says, "These things have I written, that ye may believe." And I find that interesting in itself, because he says this right after Thomas, who had doubted him, said, I want to know. I got to see it for myself. And Jesus, he says, "Okay, and here, reach hither your hand." And then he says, blessed are those who have not seen. And so a lot of people have said, well, see there, evidence is not important. But then John says, these things have I written that you may believe. So John is writing evidence after evidence after evidence in his book, and he gives at least 7 or 8 different miracles that Jesus performed as part of the evidence that Jesus is real, that he is who he said he was. And one of these is this act that he does by bringing Lazarus back to life. This is evidence. So you see the curious people, and then you also see the worshiping people, the worshipful people, the worshiping people. It says, then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, and this is obviously the same week, the week before the Passover, he came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, which had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. There made him a supper, and Martha served. But Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table with him. I find that kind of, I don't want to say humorous again, but it's partially, when you think of Lazarus, here he was who was dead, and now he's alive. And it says Martha, she's serving like Martha does a lot of times. And this is part of her worship, really. Serving is not necessarily a bad thing. Now, we see another story about Mary and Martha and how Mary did that which was right. And I get that. But I think here, as being a servant, this is not a bad thing that she's doing this. It says Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table with him. So I can just picture this. Here he is. He's been brought back to life. His sisters are all excited. They're having this big meal, this party, basically because Lazarus is alive. But they're celebrating him because of who Jesus is, because what he did. They're celebrating Jesus and the fact that he brought their brother back to life. And here's Lazarus. He's this, I think one version actually says he reclined at the table. So he's just kind of sitting there. He's just taking it all in. And he just wants to be part of it. He just sits in, I believe, in adoration of the one who brought him back to life. And we see this whole group of people here who just want to worship. And we should be that way. I hope we are that way. I hope I'm that way. I just want to see so much more. I want to be in that state of awe where you just want to look to Jesus for who he is and what he can do, what he does do for us every day. And I hear this phrase a lot. It's really true for the most part. It could always be worse. And to think that everything that we have today, the fact that, I really don't feel that well today, you might even hear a little congestion in my voice, but I promise you, I do know that it could be so much worse, so much worse. And I thank God for what he has done for me. And I just want to be like Lazarus sometimes and just sit back and just in awe and think of all that he has done and what he's withheld from me that I know I've deserved. And I know so many people that are listening to this are just like me when they think of that. But here's Lazarus. He's just reclined at the table just in awe of Jesus, the one who brought him back to life. And it says, then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house filled with the odor of the ointment. So this act of worship that Mary's doing, so many things go into this. Number one, you've heard the phrase about letting your hair down. Mary literally let her hair down. This is something that was really not appropriate for Middle Eastern women in most contexts, to just let her hair down. But in this point, she was just ready, willing, and able, and she just let her hair down. And I don't know if she didn't have towels, why she used her hair, but to think that, of course, the essence of this perfume and this would be in her hair as well as on his feet. And in the book of Matthew, it refers to her, anointing his head, and I believe it is probably the same story, but here it refers to her wiping his feet. Doesn't mean it's a contradiction, but she did both, no doubt. Anointing someone's head was kind of a thing of authority or kingship. Now, when you anoint someone's feet, you were showing them that you were a servant, which is why in the very next chapter, Jesus washes the feet of the disciples, because he was willing as a servant to lower himself to that. Here we see Mary doing this for Jesus, and she literally takes her hair within this perfume and wipes his feet because she knew who he was. She adored him for what he had done, and that was bring her brother back to life. But in doing this act, she she accepts the fact and believes that he is the Messiah, the one that would come, the one who could save all mankind. And if you and I believe that his blood paid for our sins, then everything we do should be an act of worship. And to think that there is no way we could outgive what he's done. Now, the verses I've read doesn't tell exactly how much this was worth, but we'll see this in the next verse or two. Now, this box, she broke it. And of course, in reading this next verse, you're going to see the third type. So you've seen the curious or the watchful, you've seen the worshipful, and now you see the wasteful, those who think that this whole thing's just a waste. They think of what Mary done is just a waste. And in Matthew chapter 26, we see all the disciples kind of coming out and saying, why was this not done? Here, we see it with Judas. It says, then saith one of his disciples, Judas, Simon's son, which should betray him, why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? So this is Judas. And I think some versions actually use, why was this waste? And you can see that in the book of Matthew when the disciples say, well, why would you waste this? And just let me interject here and say, you cannot waste what you give to the Lord. And this is not a plug to tithe, because listen, I'm not pastoring you. I don't care. I don't want you to send me your money. I don't that's not the point. But the point is, no matter how you look at it, whether you're giving to the poor, which is something we should do, or whether you're giving to a church to keep the light on or keep the lights on, or whatever you're giving to, just your neighbor down the street that you know has a need and you want to help them and give to them, then by all means do it. And doing that is not a waste. It can never be a waste. And Judas here, but he gives us light to how much this is really worth. When he says 300 pence, it couldn't have been sold for 300 pence. Now, maybe he's exaggerating. More than likely not. More than likely this is a realistic figure. And he's saying, couldn't you have sold it for this? So it lets us know how much this is worth. The ESV uses the word denarii here. If you just look up the Greek word that's translated as 300 pence here, you see denarii, and that's basically what one denarii was, a day's wage. And literally in this time period, a day's work was a 12-hour day. We see that in different parables when Jesus goes into the field to get the workers, and it says the 11th hour you just work one. We see that it was common for them to work 12-hour days. So 300 denarii, or 300 pence, as it says in KJV, is 300 days' work. Now, I hope you get the idea that this was worth a lot of money. Now, let's just say, let's round this up and say this is a year's wage, because that's pretty safe to say. And take the average single person. I think I could be wrong. Depends on what source you look at, but maybe $35,000 a year average. Even let's just say it's minimum wage. It would be less than that. Let's just even say it's $20,000. That's a crazy amount of money, and we don't know what she had. But no matter how you look at it, for the average person, this was like a year's wage, and she just broke it. She didn't keep the box because she knew what Jesus was worth. She knew that there was no way she could do anything that could outgive what she needed, what she owed him, in a sense. Now, that's the great thing about it. We don't have to do anything for it. But when we realize that we'll have a life in heaven, an eternal resting place because of him, then a year's wage to just break and give to him would really mean nothing. It should mean nothing, because everything we have is his anyway. And there's nothing that we have that's not because of him, when you look at it that way. But Judas, one of the disciples, said, this is just a waste. Couldn't this have been sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? Now, Jesus understands that Judas's real reason is not because of the poor, but he says this, he said not that he cared for the poor, because he was a thief, and now this is John writing, had the bag and bare what was put therein. Now, Judas had the bag, so at some point he must have been trusted, at least by the disciples, to be the one with the bag of the money. But apparently he was knocking off the top of that, or taking what was in it. In the book of Matthew, right after this, it says, "Then Judas went out and sought how he could betray him." So he basically took 30 pieces of silver, which was much less money than what this was worth. So all along, Judas was in it for the wrong reason. And that's what I need to ask you and ask myself every day. Am I in this for the right reason? The reason we should be in this is because of Jesus and what he's done, and nothing to do with money or what we can get from it, but what we have been given because of him. And I hope that that's the reason that you're listening to this, and I hope you just want to learn more about it. But in this passage, we see those three different types of people. And you'll see them in your life and just anywhere. You'll see people that are curious about Jesus. You see people that want to worship him. And you see people that just think it's all a big waste. And it will come out at some point in the end, the importance and everything that we've done is for him. Because what we do here is only temporary. And that's why what we do here should be for eternal significance. And that's why, as important as money is, and listen, I want to make more myself, but as important as it is, it's just temporary. And it's more about what we can give for him. And I consider at one point when Jesus said, "If you do it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me." So Jesus may not be right in front of you today, and you say, "Well, I can't just give him everything." But he says, "If you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me," which is why I truly believe we should be helping those less fortunate. But we also should help them in a way to train them and help them to find a job, help them to find these sort of things that can help them, not just to supply them. Because Jesus does expect these people to work for their pay. We see that in different places. And Paul especially even writes about that. So that is basically these type of people here that I was looking at in the book of John as I was reading this week. I'm not sure where we'll go next week, but Lord willing, we'll have a video out again next week, next Sunday morning. But hopefully you just got something out of this. Hopefully it's something that will make you understand it. You know, what I have doesn't really matter. It's just my heart and what I'm given to him, given through his work to that. It's the only thing that really matters in the long run. Yes, you need to plan. Yes, you need to consider the cost. I get that. But just consider that only what's given to Christ will last. And that's the best way to look at it. And if we look at it that way, we probably would be a little more content with what we have, which I have a problem with sometimes myself. But irregardless, thanks for listening, and until next time.